All right, thanks for having me out here, guys. This is really awesome to get a really kind of intimate, experience with you all. I feel like this is like MTV Unplugged, but for Bitwise, right? It's just like, get closer. I'm the creative director at Favorite Media. We are located in Oakland, and we also have offices in Seoul and Singapore. And Brett made sure I made the plug that says we're always looking for really talented, awesome people to work with. So if you're interested, if you're kind of curious about more what we do, definitely talk to myself, Christy, who's back there, and also Brett. And so I've done a lot of work in kind of the media, cultural, entertainment industry, specifically with interactive. I've been working in this space for about 15 years, done a lot of different apps, done a lot of different websites, things like that. Started right around 99, 2000. Also, the co-author of this book, Interactive Design, which is by Rockport Publishers. And really, this is kind of a primer for introducing people to the concepts of user-centered design. And I also like to do drawings of buildings that could not possibly stand up. So that's kind of a little on the side. They don't really, I used to have like a little bit of a greeting card company, and kind of my extension to doing stuff that was more print-based had like this other side of things that I used to do. However, tonight I want to talk to you about digital branding, and I want to talk to you about this concept that's really important to me. And it's this idea that our brands today are just about as much what they do and how they behave, and not just how they look. So the features and the functionality that fosters all these experiences are branding. The digital space really can't be separated when you think about kind of how it looks and what it does. And so before I kind of dive too much into that, I want to take a step back and kind of give you a couple cultural and historical examples to help set the context. So we're looking at here are masks from the ancient Dogon tribe. They're from the West African country of Mali. And some of these masks are said to have magical powers, and many represent hunters and animals. So from left to right, we have the monkey, the white monkey, and the hyena. And here we have the rabbit, the lion, and the bird. There's about 80 different masks within this tribe alone. Here we have the walu, or the mythical antelope, and it's said to represent the hard work of the farmer. Now, these masks are very specific to their tribe. And so if you think about their structural form, their carvings and their markings, they all have very specific meanings and associations. However, there's a problem as we look at this. And a couple years ago, I took my son to the Brooklyn Children's Museum, and we were looking at a couple masks that were like this. And they were on the wall, and that was the problem. We were looking at them as these static objects. So as we looked at them, their story and interpretation was incomplete. They're meant to be seen like this. So they're meant to be seen in the context of motion, and their full meaning is only realized in the form of dance. So the Dogon believe that the dance creates this bridge into the supernatural world, and without that dance, then their dead cannot cross over into peace. So moving on now, I'd like to take you back to the year 1880. So this is the year that the drinking straw was invented. That's just like a fun little fact, right? This is also the year that Thomas Edison performed the first test of the electric railway. And I want you to imagine that you're a student at the Massachusetts Agricultural College in Amherst, Mass. And you've just opened up your student yearbook, which I was frankly a little surprised that they hadn't back then, but apparently they do. So you've just received your yearbook, and you open it up and you see this illustration. A bunch of students kind of go into the room of another student. They pounce on him, tie him up, and then they drag him outside and dunk water on him. So this is one of the first illustrated examples of hazing, right? Fraternities, sororities, military, so many other social groups engage in different forms of hazing. And it's through this abuse and humiliation that kind of creates this common rite of passage, right? These binds these individuals through this shared experience. Here's a recent hazing incident that frankly makes me cringe, I'll be honest. Nothing like a little spice on the junk to ruin the party. Woo. Yeah, party foul. Seriously. And so, unfortunately, many of these incidents kind of cross over into physical injury and harm, so it's no surprise that they're banned. But the takeaway here is that these are really complex social rituals. The actions and behaviors are very specific to that group. They have to be. The group has an identity, and the hazing is a reflection of that uniqueness. So now we're going to go to even a darker place, right? I'm just really taking us down. So we're all familiar with the swastika. At one time it was a positive symbol, but we're probably most familiar with its twisted adopted use for the Nazi Party and the Aryan race in 1922, and especially when Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933. And this symbol was really incorporated into everything. Flags, posters, you name it, they pretty much put it everywhere. It was really visual propaganda at its best, and it was a reminder that the eyes of the Nazi Party were everywhere. Steve Heller, I'm not sure if any of you guys know Steve Heller. He's a major design guru, big voice in the design community. But he said that once the Nazis misappropriated the use of this symbol, it became a symbol of hate and could never be redeemed. And I would argue that's really true, because even today, as you look at it, it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. When I was first working on this talk, I was working at a coffee shop, and when I was working on this slide in particular, I was kind of looking over my shoulder to be like, what are they thinking of me? Who is this guy? Like, what kind of presentation is this? So you're also probably familiar with this. This is the Hitler salute, or the Nazi salute. And this action was mandatory for civilians, and its purpose was to glorify Germany. Author Erik Larson, who wrote In the Garden of Beasts, highlights the power that it had over people. This action really kind of created this blanket of obedience, and it was very visible and very present in all the lives of Germans. And civilians and soldiers had to do this without hesitation. And I think this quote really encounters how just absurd it became, how just it was almost ludicrous of this instant reaction. So the Hitler salute is the gestural equivalent to the visual iconography of the swastika, right? Like the swastika, the Hitler salute is illegal in parts of Europe, and they both represent hate in the same way. So it didn't matter if you were a shopkeeper, a soldier, or a child, you were kind of embedded in this kind of world. And so the point I want to make is that we as humans can build very strong associations with not only actions and gestures, but also visuals. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So if we look onto something a little more positive, so I grew up in Connecticut. I don't know if that's positive, but I grew up in Connecticut and kind of stuck between New York and Boston. And basically, when I was young, it was really hard to decide what teams I should root for. So I started really falling in love with the Giants, and that's kind of carried on, even though I moved out here. And so I was, of course, very excited every time they won a Super Bowl. And I was also very excited to see this. So this is Victor Cruz. And every time he scored a touchdown, he would do his salsa celebration, right? You can find the best stuff on the internet. I mean, it's just not that hard. And so, he became known as Mr. Salsa. And so we see athletes kind of using these signature poses, these signature celebrations to brand themselves. And he's far from the only one. Here we have Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Packers, and he kind of did his wrestling championship move every time he scored a touchdown. And what I thought was interesting about this is, once he started doing commercials for Allstate, they took that gesture and they turned it into something to align with their brand, and they created that discount double check. So really interesting how he kind of created something, and then a brand comes in and wants to take it and make it their own. Athletes around the world are doing this. This is Usain Bolt, and every time he'd smash a world record, we'd see kind of his signature pose that I'm not even going to try to do, even though it's tempting. It's not just about athletes, right? Performers, musicians, singers, they all kind of use motion to brand themselves. So here's the Temptations, very highly influential to soul. And we can kind of see how they were known for their distinct harmonies, their very snazzy outfits, and their choreography. And it's kind of the last two that are really interesting. Their matching snazzy outfits as well as their choreography. They're really kind of couldn't be separated. So now you guys probably also have your own signature move, right? That you can think of for a favorite performer, celebrity, actor. You know, there's probably people you're like, oh yeah, that one, that was really awesome. And you know, they become kind of part of the pop culture lexicon just as much as the performer or artist or celebrity themselves. So we live in this world where people want to be seen as brands, and then there's this shift, right, where companies and services and brands, they want to be seen as people. So the lines are very much getting blurred between the two. Now here's the good thing. If you aren't a professional celebrity or rock star, you can still create your own signature move. All you got to do is just go to the Air Guitar Championships held every year, and you can start to rock out. So there's plenty of opportunities for all of you, right? However, maybe sex and drugs and rock and roll are less your thing, and you're more about the rock and less, or excuse me, more about the sex and less about the rock. Then you can enter the Air Sex World Championships. So your thrusts and gyrations could really pay off. So get practicing. So they have a tagline of making love to nothing at all. So that's the bar that you guys have to kind of reach, right? So whether it's through these custom rituals, personal branding, or just entertainment, we as humans have had a long relationship between gestures, motions, and behaviors. Our identities are embodied in our actions and our aesthetics. So it's no surprise that we expect that same relationship with all the digital products that we create and use. And so as a designer and as a developer, you know, whatever you are in this field, you should be very interested in kind of crafting that relationship as well. So when I take a step back and kind of look where I came from, I very much started coming from more of a branding kind of visual background. And so as a designer and communicator, I was really kind of trained to think of branding through this kind of static layer, right? You know, just creating this JPEG, and I'd be matching type and fonts, and you know, things were very, very limited. You know, it was really kind of early days in '99, 2000. And so as I started getting more involved with, you know, understanding brands and kind of seeing where we could push things, and as technology increased, there became a lot more opportunities, and I became much more interested in kind of this space in between. That was the one effect. I didn't use too many. That was the one payoff effect for you all, right? So I kind of consider this a bit of a magical space here, right? So if we think of, you know, what the GUIs are, and if you guys are, you know, how many of you guys are developers versus designers? We have mostly developers here on that side. Yeah. And any designers out here? Or hybrids? Unicorns? They call them unicorns now. Cool. So, you know, as we start to think about this, we realize that there's also this same kind of blurring where we need to pay attention to that space as well. So our brands are really part of these larger systems, right? They live on multi-devices, multi-touch points. Sometimes they exist within a single code base. More likely than not, they don't. And as we think of how these things are going to extend into, you know, multiple apps, glasses, watches, cars, everything, we really need to kind of pay attention to this, because as the layer of technology increases, the opportunity for that emotional connection and personality of your brand, of your product, increases as well. So one of the things I like to do is look at this a little bit in reverse, right? Can we look at pre-existing things and kind of hone in on what was important to that particular brand? So in order to do that, we have to use something that's in common. So I like to use the video player, because we're all very familiar with video players. And so, you know, most video players are going to have something in common, right? They're going to have their playhead, they're going to have an enlarge button, they're going to have time code, all those things that are just necessary. But we can go a little deeper. So here's the video player on TED.com, and we're probably very familiar with their inspirational and educational talks. And one of the things you'll notice is that they have the ability to have subtitles, right? So not only does that help for accessibility, but then they also have multiple languages. And that kind of feature, you know, putting the time and effort to get that content ready, to make that happen, really lives up and ties into their tagline of ideas worth sharing, right? This is the kind of stuff that you could look from a very high level about what your product is about. And then how do you kind of get very granular and say like, well, what are the things that we need to implement to make sure that we're really living up to that and not just kind of banging it out? Now, of course, as we kind of go into, MVPs and stuff like that, it's much more about iteration and building on that. But you guys, as kind of this startup world, you're going to have to really separate yourself from your competitors. So you're going to need to kind of find the thing about you that can separate you a little bit, right? Of course, there's going to be a visual component to that, but it's going to go beyond that. And this is where you guys are really empowered to think about that. This is where you guys kind of get to put on that branding hat and be like, holy crap, I can start to separate ourselves by my talents, and I can kind of make a difference here. This is the video player for ABC. And again, very similar. It's going to have all the kind of common things. Doesn't have transcripts. But what we see are these like little white dots. And what are those white dots? Commercials. Commercials, exactly. So very easily, we're able to see what's important to them. We can kind of see their business model being bubbled up through these little kind of details. There's something else that happens too. When you get to the end of this, you can see that it's going to show you what's coming up next. So it's not going to play another episode of Modern Family, which is frankly probably something that would be a safe bet, right? You're like, I just watched Modern Family, maybe I'd want to see another one. Or maybe it would give me a wall like YouTube of all these possible opportunities to dive into content still within their family, but they decide not to do that. More specifically, they decide they're going to push you into the next video of something that's within their family but different. So kind of encouraging you to taste something else within their family and get you hooked on something else. And it's not a passive thing. You can see that it's going to start in 25 seconds whether you like it or not. So they're very kind of thinking about how they want to force you into this channel. In some ways, this is very much like the TV model, right? The next show is just going to start. So this is a project I worked on years ago with a company called The N. Now they're Teen Nick, and they're part of the Nickelodeon family. And so this website was really kind of bringing the teen community together around their favorite shows. And so with our video player, what we decided to do, since there was a large kind of avatar community, a lot of members, we noticed that a lot of the users, they were having these message board conversations about their shows. So what we decided to do is kind of bring that and make that happen kind of like a pop-up video style right on the video itself. And keep in mind, this is about like 2006, so this is a long time ago when we did this. This isn't, now you kind of take this stuff for granted, but back then, a lot of this kind of stuff wasn't really happening. And so you could basically leave a comment, and then someone that would come behind you would see that comment. So it was really kind of get this explosion when all of a sudden there'd be a juicy kiss scene, or some crazy thing would go down, which surprisingly, like those kind of shows, they really went to dark places, So there'd be a lot of chatter, and you can kind of see it would bubble up over here, where you could kind of click that, pause the video, and then you could just review all the different comments that were happening. So we called this vomenting, right? Video commenting. And the idea was to encourage vomenting all over the place. Very appropriate for their user. So this last example is for PBS Kids. And of course, the audience here is preschoolers and their families. And so I wanted to show this one because sometimes it's about what's not there, not just what's there, right? So here it is. We look at this experience, and it's really been stripped back. They've kind of enlarged some of the bigger features, some of the main controls, but they've really kind of pared down the experience because after all, we are really needing to think about our users, right? It's not about features for feature's sake. It's really about trying to find the right features to understand and meet the needs of your primary audiences. So as I've been thinking about this concept a lot, I started to group it into three main categories. So the first one is complementary. And high level, I like to call this kind of the interface personality, right? So this is kind of the transitions, the animations that happen, all the little kind of details, bells and whistles that you can put into your product just to really define the type of personality that it is. And there's really something there because when you think about who you are as a brand and what kind of keeps you on brand versus not, you need to kind of draw a line in the sand and say this type of behavior, this type of action is on brand and this isn't, right? And so you start very high level, and then you kind of work down and get very granular and very detailed. So to start with an analog example, who here had a Walkman? Yes, a lot of us here, right? So I remember kind of being in the back of the bus, opening up, getting my cassette tape in, popping it in, and just rocking out to Roxette the Look. Man, brings me back. Got one person knows what I'm talking about. Thank goodness. So that way that door closed, right, when you snapped it shut, it was very satisfying. It created this like clicking sound as you closed that Walkman. Well, that was not by accident. That was designed. That was a very specific design consideration that was not by default. And that's a good example of kind of those things that you might not even notice that you're paying attention to, but it feels right. So here's an example. This is kind of, we look at just the full breadth of transitions and animations. This is something that's really quite simple. This is an app that just does one thing. If you're playing kind of board games or things like that, it allows you to essentially keep track. It's an iPad app. You can keep track of your friends' scores, right? So on the surface, it's very simple, and they could have made this very dull. But as you look at it, it's really quite playful, which would kind of match the mood that you'd be in. You'd be playing games, you'd be sitting around, and you'd kind of have this thing that would just be really fun. So this is a great example of how they've defined their interface personality. Another quick example is just with this rubber band reload effect. And this is a great example of just kind of branding between the GUIs, right? So we had two static points, and here we are kind of looking at how to infuse that and create something that's very unique. We'll go back to that for a second. And if we think about this, something that has now become a very common pattern, something that we see all kinds of products using, we notice that a lot of other people are looking to infuse their kind of mark on that. So you can think of what Google's is with their kind of shapes, switching around. Twitter has their own, LinkedIn. There's all these different variations of just this simple pattern and how you can kind of make it your own. So the next kind of grouping is what I call synergetic features and functionality. And I kind of think that when you look at these ones, these are the things that will make the brand bigger than what it was, right? It's moving beyond just transitions. These are the kind of things that hopefully are owned in the eyes, minds, and hearts of your users. And when I say owned, sometimes it means legally owned. It might be actually trademarked.
Pay my bill.
Your account is already paid in full.
Oh, well, in that case, back to vacation mode. Boots and pants and boots and pants and boots and pants and boots and pants and boots and
Voice-enabled bill pay. Just a tap away on the Geico app.
So voice-enabled bill pay, right? There's nothing visual about that at all. And we're going to be seeing more and more of these types of opportunities as we kind of look at what we're creating, right? So they want to get you to think about, you can just very easily go and just talk to your phone and pay your bill. Very easy, and they're going to make a whole commercial. And frankly, half the commercials out there when they come to apps and stuff like that, they're focusing on very specific features, right? That's what they're about. Who here has used the paper app? Any of you guys use the paper app? So this is a drawing app, very simple, quite beautiful, limited color palette, not trying to do too much. That's what makes it effective. And one of the things that's really nice about it is if you make a mistake, then you can use your two fingers and kind of use this gesture and kind of rewind to the point before you screwed up, basically. And so you'll notice that rewind there has a little trademark. So they very much want to own the idea of rewind when it comes to making mistakes. They want you to get to think about that.
Hello. Do you like having your Cartoon Network on the go?
Why, yes. Yes, I do. I like to watch clips and episodes.
What about games?
I also love playing Cartoon Network games.
Well, now with the new Cartoon Network app, you can do both at the same time.
Whoa.
All right, now let's test this baby out.
It works great. Game, video. Wait, what are you doing? Don't shoot darts at me. I wasn't told about this.
So the Cartoon Network Watch and Play app, this is one of the projects that I worked on. And when I was coming up with the concept, it was really about how do we kind of think about the app experience, but then infuse something that takes it to the next level, right? How do we kind of keep it on brand? But in this case, what we wanted to do was use the device orientation as navigation, something that would be, frankly, very inappropriate for a lot of audiences. But for the kids' audience, after testing, we really found that they got it, and they found it very fun, and it was exciting. And so here's an example where, they basically have competitors. You can see a lot of the same content on the Comcast app or the Verizon app. And so they wanted to make sure that their audience was going to go to their app and download it. And of course, they're playing games, and they're often watching TV at the same time. So this was really to try to bring those worlds together in one space. But if it was too much, then basically you could turn the app and decide to get one experience over the other. So there's a lot of opportunities where how you can kind of push that, and again, realize how you can kind of separate yourself from just what your competitors are doing. Now the last section is symbiotic. And I argue here that the features and the functionality, they're so integrated that if you were to remove them, then there's a high probability that the product could entirely fail. This is going to be the kind of functionality that if it's a branded verb, then chances are it's in this category. So my first job when I was in Connecticut was working at a small print shop. And I had a very limited skill set. I could do very few things. But the one thing I could do was make a Xerox, right? And the idea of Xeroxing is very much like this, right? It wasn't making a photocopy. It was going to make a Xerox. It wasn't on a Xerox copier, but it didn't matter, right? It was just all about going and making a Xerox. So back then, they really owned the idea of photocopying. What is Pinterest without pinning? You really need kind of the pinning. It's really the kind of functional spine of that brand. What would it be if we decided to remove that? This pinning thing really isn't working out. They really wouldn't have that much of a product. So this is a poster I saw a while back on 34th Street in Manhattan. And it's an advertisement for Project Runway, but it's also an advertisement for Twitter. Twitter's getting a lot of free advertising through this. But nowhere does it say, Twitter. There's no little bird. But really the idea of the hashtag is kind of this branded functionality that has very little to do with updates that appear on your machine. That was my Envision app telling me that I needed to install a new update. So hold on a second here.
That's a clever design on somebody's part.
I'll let them know. This is a bug. I'm gonna tell them about this. Whew. We're back. All right. So again, with the hashtag, it's really about what it does. Shortly after that, there was a ad week, and it basically said the hashtag election. It didn't call it the Twitter election. It mentions Twitter after that, but they called it the hashtag election. Again, a reminder about what Twitter was really about and why Twitter was powerful. Now, what's interesting is we're starting to see the hashtag evolve, and it's just becoming a ubiquitous kind of way to share throughout social networks. But certainly at the time, it was really mission critical for Twitter. Now, one of the more ubiquitous examples is the Facebook like button, right? And it's kind of worked everywhere into our digital and physical lives. You see pillows of it. You see everything about it. In fact, we have liked things over 1.2 trillion times, which is crazy. But if we look at that, what I like doing is kind of seeing the other fringe things that have kind of popped up as a result of that kind of piece of pop culture really now. So this was a project by a student at MIT. And it's this vest that you wear, and basically if you go and like a person's wall that's wearing the vest, their status comment or something like that, then the vest will hug you. So it was really this way to kind of bring people closer, and connect you and kind of have this extra layer from this cold medium. But when you think about the like button, really visually there isn't that much to it, right? We even see that there's not even that much visual consistency to it because people are using it in all kinds of different ways. But it's much more about what it does and the types of experience that Facebook, wants to have on their platform. That's why you don't get a dislike button or a hate button, even though frankly people ask for it all the time, right? But they want to kind of keep it as positive, and they're certainly trying other things. Now, of course, you could always say, well, Andy, there's so many people on Facebook, of course that's going to catch on, like how could it not? But one question I have for you guys is, when was the last time you poked someone, right? So I come from the agency world. For me, the clients are asking for this all the time. And for you as kind of product creators, you need to be kind of looking for different ways. Now, when my clients go and ask about it, they don't quite have the language for it. They don't know what to call it, right? So I've gotten the wow factor. This is one of the things. We need the wow factor, right? We need that extra 5%. That's the thing that's really going to take it over the top. And my favorite, the special sauce. So you guys probably have gems as well if you've worked with clients. And the thing is that we're actually all thinking about this, right? We're already talking about it. The problem is we don't have the dialogue. We don't have a language to talk about it. And so what I'd suggest, whether it's an internal team or it's with clients, then what's really important is you start to call it something, right? Talk about it as terms as the interface personality. Talk about it as defining a thing. In the same way that you have these other things that that you're trying to create, you need to be acknowledging that this is something that needs to exist. You need to formalize it in a way. I'm getting a phone call. So one of the ways I like to do this is I create low fidelity behavior galleries, right? So this is very early on in the process, and this is kind of how I use to define the interface personality of a project. So think of these as essentially mood boards, but with motion. So I'll go through and I'll use my phone and just kind of grab little snippets as inspiration points. I'll go on YouTube and grab little clips. There's also a lot of great sites out there, and maybe you've seen some of these, that you can use as kind of reference points. This is captivate.co. It's just a great site full of beautiful mobile examples. This one's appetizer.tumblr.com. And here we have useyourinterface.com. Again, just like libraries of patterns where people have really started to add their own special sauce to them. There's also a lot of great code samples out there. And what's interesting about this, early on, maybe the code is helpful, but maybe it's not. And sometimes it's not actually about the code yet. It's more about defining what's on brand, right? So you can use these as the inspiration points for your products. So this is unheap.com, and it's a fantastic repository of jQuery plugins. Now when I get these things, and I make this part of the process with my clients, I put them into a tool called Icebergs. You guys know about Icebergs at all? So Icebergs is kind of like a Dropbox meets Pinterest meets Gimme Bar. Combine those all together where you can kind of upload files from your desktop or your computer, as well as kind of grab samples from the web, and you can essentially put them and share them and comment on top of them. Share them with teams, share them with your client. So this is essentially how I put together my low fidelity behavior galleries. Now, one of the things I've found is really helpful. At Favorite Medium, we work in Agile, specifically Scrum. And what we do is we'll try to dedicate specific sprints just to the interface personality. Again, being very transparent with our clients about what we're trying to do and say, hey, we're going to start to plan this right now, right? We're going to put this in and just say this is really important to us and this is going to be really important to you. So let's just account for it now and start to try to bookmark some things in there, some time in the sprints that we can kind of focus on that. And so what that means is kind of also identifying, some of the user stories where a brand can potentially own that functionality, right? So here it is, you're writing your user stories, and any of you guys work in Agile? I don't know if you're familiar with that? Okay, cool. So, as you start to write your user stories, right? At first, you're really just going to be writing them to kind of capture them. But as, your team kind of comes together and you're starting to prioritize what's important about them, then you could really identify, hey, there might be an opportunity here to do something more with this one, right? And let's kind of share that with our client. Let's acknowledge and show our value by saying that, we're going to really hone in. We think there's something here that's going to be so important that it's going to kind of separate them from a competitor. they're going to kind of understand that you're not just going through the motions and just kind of, going through this sprint process, but they're really going to understand that you understand what's important to them from that high level, right? And how you get them as a brand. And that's going to frankly surprise a lot of them because they're not thinking of it in that way. So my talk has been pretty narrow in focus. And of course, branding and interactivity is very complex. So I just had a couple reminders that I wanted to share just to make sure that I'm not totally crazy. First, it's still all about your users, right? We're designing experiences for people, not the other way around. It's not brands. We're not designing these for brands. It's still about the people. It's about our users. We have to keep them in mind. They are going to be the judge and jury of our products, whether we like it or not, and they will let us know if they don't like it. Content is still king, something that is, of course, pretty overused, but also very important, right? Users just want good content, and they often don't care where it's going to come from. I mean, you think about, your Facebook wall, and you're like, it looks funny, and then you're like, oh, it's on this site, right? Well, it just happens to be on that site, but frankly, it could be in a lot of places. But what they do care about is it wrapped in a great user experience. And of course, context is going to be key to what we're doing, right? The experience of kind of sitting down on the couch and looking at something is going to be very different than trying to run and catch a subway or something like that, right? Rachel Hinman, in her book, The Mobile Frontier, said, without understanding context, many of our actions and behaviors would fail to make sense. And that is very, very true. It's a fine line between great and gimmick or amazing and annoying. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. So, got to find those right opportunities, right? I am talking about animations and transitions and bells and whistles, but it's not just to say, like, throw them in everywhere and go crazy, right? Like, really take a step back and understand, how is it affecting performance, right? When is the right time to use something that's maybe a little more custom if you're developing, say, an iOS app? When you want to use something that's a little more straightforward versus something that's really custom, how is that going to affect? When is it going to get annoying? I remember during the age of splash screens, I don't know if any of you guys had to create any splash screens way back when, but it would be all about these kind of crazy animations and people doing things that were completely over the top. And it was great for that executive presentation where they're like, wow, you guys got us. But you show that same presentation 4 times in a row to that same executive, and they're like, can you kill me, right? So show it to them 4 times in a row, just to let them understand when does that get annoying. Another thing is that functions can and should reduce form, right? It's a way to simplify things. I think a really good example of that is with that paper app. So when they created this rewind gesture, they didn't need to have this edit button, right? They didn't need to kind of clutter up the interface with something. Instead, they allowed you to kind of just do it with a gesture, which kept everything very minimal. Now, of course, the other side of that is there's a trade-off. And the trade-off is that the user's going to have to learn this stuff, right? And so that's the conversation that you're going to have. If you don't have some type of very clear button, some type of affordance in order to let users know that they can rewind, then that means they're going to have to learn it. And the sacrifice may be that for a while, they don't think they can kind of edit their drawings, right? So that's where you have to understand, like, how important is that? This is a big one. This is, frankly, probably why places like this should exist and will continue to thrive. The collaboration between designers, user experience designers, developers has to just continue to grow, right? We need to realize that, frankly, we are all designers. We just kind of see things in a different way, right? We share a lot of the same beliefs. We all want the same types of things out of our products, but we just have different perspectives. And so we see these new ways of working, cross-functional pairing, and all these different opportunities. It doesn't matter how you work as a team. What matters is that you kind of think about reducing just massive documentation and focus instead on collaboration. It's not about the specific process. It's about an acknowledgement that whether you guys like it or not, you guys are still all designers. So now I'm going to play devil's advocate in my own talk. And I kind of see that no topic is really black and white, right? And Although I see major opportunities for us to create these really great branded experiences where brands can own functionality, I also don't want to see a patent on every action, right? This is kind of the other side of it that frankly hurts my head. You know, when these gestures and functions, when should they be owned? When should they be kind of considered part of the commons, something for everyone to use where they're just part of this convention? You know, how do we give back and kind of better what we're doing? You know, just kind of contributing to great experiences versus trying to get something that we can really own and make it ours. And you could just look at, you know, the battles between Apple and Samsung and how they constantly go back and forth, right? And they're just kind of going after and like punching each other a little bit, being like, no, I own that, no, I own that. In fact, the bounce back rubber band reload effect is one of the things that there was kind of conflict over. So I think this is really an interesting thing, and I don't really have the answer to this, but I just kind of feel like I wanted to let you guys know that I'm thinking about this because I think we should all be thinking about it, right? It's not so clear and we all want to push things, but it is kind of something that we just need to talk about. So now the great thing, though, is when we do this right, we may just be adding a little bit of interface personality to our product that helps separate it. You know, we may be doing something bigger, right? We may be improving people's lives, giving people a voice, or even giving people a future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you to Andy. That was awesome. And it's so fun to see kind of new ideas and new people getting involved in this community. And really it grows the talent that all of us have to draw upon. I think one of the most important things that I enjoyed hearing Andy say was the importance of working together and relying on each other, because we've got so many different disciplines in this room, right? And the ability to leverage that talent and find that person who has the missing answer, the missing idea to whatever it is that you're working on is really key to all of this. I want to get a couple of things on your radar. The first, Miguel is going to hold up a t-shirt over here. These are the official 59 Days of Code shirts, and they're awesome. If you're interested in one, here's the deal with 59 Days of Code. We buy them for $10 and we sell them for $5 because we're really bad at math. And we want you to have them. We just want you to wear them, and we want you to feel proud of being a part of this community. You can go get a Fresno State jersey if that's your thing. You can get a 59 Days of Code shirt if that's your thing, and we want you all to be a part of that. And then finally, I want to leave you with a little tease. So quickly, somebody who doesn't work at 59 Days of Code or Bitwise, what's the date of 59 Days of Code? June 28th. Awesome. Free shirt up front here, Miguel.
That's for paying attention.
So, guys, it is going to be awesome this year. Just to name a couple of things that have added, so we're at the convention center, which means capacity has gone up. We're going to have classic video games present. We're going to have Red Bull present with its gaming stuff. We're going to have 30 awesome entries that I kid you not, there's an entry in the competition that the attorney who was the patent attorney who prosecuted Facebook's very first patent drove down to Fresno to see if it was really real. You've got some awesome stuff going on, and I hope that you come and check it out. It's completely free. It's a big party, and then if you're involved in the competition afterwards, we throw a big after party. I want to tease out one more thing, and that is we might need some more space in here, right? It turns out that there are a lot of you, and so one thing that we're very excited about is an announcement we've got coming up for Bitwise at 59 Days of Code that we look forward to sharing with you all, where we might have some more space to do more cool stuff. So thanks for coming out, hang out, check out Hack Night, and have a good weekend, guys.
Thanks, guys. If anyone has any questions, also feel free to come up and